Tom stood by the kitchen window, watching the rain pour down outside. 7 years of marriage to Becky had given him a comfortable life. Their two-story house in a quiet neighborhood was everything they had dreamed of when they first met. Pictures of their happy moments hung on the walls: beach trips, hiking adventures, family gatherings. But lately, something felt off. It started with small things. Becky used to call him during lunch breaks just to chat. Those calls had stopped 3 months ago. She claimed work was keeping her busy, but Tom noticed she still found time to text someone else. Her phone would light up late at night, and she would quickly turn it face down when he walked into the room. "Working late again?" Tom asked one evening as Becky rushed through the door at 9 p.m., her hair slightly messy and lipstick faded. "Yeah, big project. The boss is pushing deadlines," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "I'm going to take a shower." Tom nodded, but something in his gut tightened. The Becky he knew would have complained for 20 minutes about her demanding boss, sharing every detail of her stressful day. This new Becky was brief, distant. As weeks passed, the signs piled up. She changed her phone password. She started dressing differently: new clothes, more makeup, a different perfume. Their intimate moments became rare, with Becky always too tired or not feeling well. Tom tried to ignore his growing worries. Maybe it was just a rough patch. Maybe he was overthinking things. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Then came the night that changed everything. Becky had gone to what she called a team dinner. Tom decided to surprise her by cleaning up around the house. While putting away her jacket that had been tossed on the couch, he caught a whiff of something, a men's cologne he didn't recognize. Not the light, citrusy scent he used, but something woody and strong. His hands trembled as he held the jacket. The cologne smell was strongest on the collar, as if someone had hugged her goodbye. Tom sat down, the jacket still in his hands, as the truth he had been avoiding crashed down on him. The next day, he tried to act normal during breakfast. Becky was busy checking her phone as usual, barely noticing his silence. "Who keeps texting you so early?" he finally asked, trying to sound casual. Becky's head snapped up. "Just work stuff." She quickly put her phone away. "You've been working a lot lately," Tom said. "Everything okay at the office?" "Of course," she said too quickly. "Why wouldn't it be?" After she left, Tom sat alone with his coffee gone cold. He thought about confronting her directly but stopped himself. What if she denied everything? What if she had an explanation for the cologne that made him look like a jealous, untrusting husband? He needed proof. Over the next few days, Tom paid closer attention. He noticed how Becky would step outside to take certain calls. How she would claim to be meeting the girls, but come home with no stories about what they did. How sometimes she would mention being at places Tom knew had closed early that night. One evening, while Becky was in the shower, Tom gave in to his suspicions and glanced at her phone left on the kitchen counter. It was locked, but a message preview showed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place." His heart sank. He put the phone down exactly as he'd found it. That night, lying next to his wife of 7 years, Tom stared at the ceiling in the dark. Who was she meeting? How long had this been going on? The questions kept him awake until morning. Tom tried following her once, but Becky was careful. She would take strange routes, sometimes doubling back as if checking for someone following her. Regular ways of catching a cheating spouse wouldn't work with her. He needed a different approach, something she would never suspect. Something that would let him see the truth while remaining invisible in plain sight. The idea came to him suddenly while watching a movie where a character pretended to be something they weren't. What if he could see everything without Becky knowing he was watching? What if he pretended to be blind? The idea of pretending to be blind seemed crazy at first. Tom paced around his office during lunch break, wondering if he had finally lost his mind. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If Becky believed he couldn't see, she might let her guard down completely. "You look like you haven't slept in days," said Paul, Tom's childhood friend who worked as an eye doctor across town. They sat in a quiet corner of a cafe, away from other customers. Tom stared into his coffee. "I need to ask you something weird, really weird." Paul leaned forward. "I've known you since we were 8. Nothing you say will surprise me." "I think Becky's cheating on me," Tom said, the words burning his throat. Saying it out loud made it feel more real. Paul's face fell. Man, I'm sorry. Are you sure? Tom explained all the signs, the late nights, the cologne, the secretive texting. I need proof, but she's too careful. I can't catch her the normal way. So what's your plan? Paul asked. Tom took a deep breath. I want to pretend I've gone blind. Suddenly, from some rare condition, she'll think I can't see what she's doing. Paul almost choked on his coffee. You can't be serious. I am, and I need your help to make it believable. Over the next hour, Tom laid out his plan. He needed medical information about a condition that could cause temporary blindness. He needed to learn how newly blind people navigate their world. Most importantly, he needed Becky to believe it. Paul reluctantly agreed to help. This is crazy, but I can see you've made up your mind. That evening, Tom did research online. He watched videos of people learning to use white canes. He read about cortical blindness, a condition where the eyes work fine, but the brain can't process the images. It could happen suddenly from a stroke or brain injury, and sometimes it was temporary. Perfect for his plan. The next day, Paul gave him actual medical documents about the condition, with the patient's name removed. You'll need these to make it look real, he said. But Tom, think about what you're doing. Living a lie like this, it's going to change you. Tom brushed aside his concern. I need to know the truth. They spent the weekend preparing. Paul taught Tom how to use a white cane, how to act like someone who had recently lost their sight. Move your head when sounds happen. Reach for things uncertainly. Don't make eye contact, let your eyes wander or stay unfocused. Tom practiced until his movements felt natural. He bought special dark glasses and ordered a proper white cane online with rush delivery. How will I make it look real when it first happens? Tom asked. You'll need to fake an episode, Paul explained. Dizziness, confusion, then panic when you realize you can't see. I'll be on standby to take you to my clinic. We'll make it look like a real emergency. Tom wrote an email to his boss, explaining that he would need medical leave soon. He didn't say why. That would come after the incident. 2 days later, everything was ready. Tom's heart pounded as he waited for the right moment. Becky was cooking dinner, her back turned to him. Taking a deep breath, he knocked over his water glass deliberately. Sorry, he said, reaching to clean it up. Then he froze, his hand in midair. That's weird. What's weird? Becky asked, still stirring the pasta sauce. Tom stood up shakily. I can't. He blinked rapidly, moving his head from side to side. Becky, something's wrong. Everything's going dark. Becky turned around, concern crossing her face. What do you mean? Tom stumbled, knocking over a chair. His acting felt surprisingly convincing as real fear mixed with his performance. I can't see. I can't see anything. Becky rushed to his side, her hands gripping his arms. What do you mean you can't see? Tom stopped joking around. But Tom continued his panicked act, his eyes darting around without focusing on anything. Call an ambulance. Please, I can't see. Becky's voice trembled as she called emergency services. Tom heard real fear in her voice. For a moment, he felt guilty for scaring her. But then he remembered the strange cologne, the secret texts, all the lies. His resolve hardened. The deception had begun. There was no turning back now. The hospital lights seemed too bright as Tom lay in the bed, keeping his eyes unfocused. Becky sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. He could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn on their first date. For a moment, memories of happier times made him doubt his plan. Mrs. Miller. Paul entered the room in his white coat, playing his part perfectly. I'm Dr. Walker. I've reviewed your husband's tests. Tom felt Becky's hand tighten around his. Is he going to be okay? Will he see again? Paul flipped through papers on his clipboard. The good news is there's no physical damage to his eyes. This appears to be cortical blindness. The eyes work, but the brain isn't processing the images. But why? How did this happen? Becky's voice shook. Sometimes it can be triggered by stress, high blood pressure, or minor strokes that don't show other symptoms, Paul explained. The good news is that in many cases, it's temporary. How temporary? Becky asked. Could be weeks, could be months. Some patients recover completely, others partially. Paul's voice was professionally concerned. For now, he'll need to learn some adaptation skills. The next day, Tom was released with a white cane and dark glasses. The ride home was silent except for the radio. He could feel Becky watching him, probably wondering how their lives would change. At home, Tom bumped into furniture deliberately, feeling his way around rooms he knew by heart. Sorry, he mumbled after knocking over a vase. Still getting used to this. It's okay, Becky said, guiding him to the couch. We'll figure it out together. For the first week, Becky barely left his side. She called in sick to work, cooked his favorite meals, and read to him in the evenings. Tom almost forgot why he was pretending in the first place. Maybe he had been wrong about her. Then her phone buzzed one evening while she was in the kitchen. Tom heard her quick footsteps, followed by whispers he couldn't quite make out. Everything okay? He called out. Just work, she said, returning to the living room. They want me to come back. We're behind on the Johnson project. You should go, Tom said. You've done enough here. I'm getting better at moving around. Becky returned to work the next day. Tom used his alone time to practice moving normally when no one was watching. He installed a small camera in the living room bookshelf, connected to an app on his phone that he checked when Becky wasn't home. By the second week, the dynamic had shifted. Becky seemed less worried, more distant. I have to work late tonight, she said one morning. Don't wait up for dinner. Again? Tom asked, making sure to stare blankly past her shoulder. Third time this week. Big project, she said quickly. I'll make it up to you this weekend. After she left, Tom checked his calendar. It was their anniversary on Saturday. She hadn't mentioned it once. That night, Tom heard Becky come home around midnight. She moved quietly, probably thinking he was asleep. He heard her in the bathroom, shower running for nearly 30 minutes. Washing away evidence, he thought bitterly. The next morning, he found a long blonde hair on her coat, not Becky's short brown hair. When he casually mentioned meeting her for lunch, she made up an excuse about client meetings. Living in darkness was harder than Tom expected. Not the fake blindness, he was getting good at that, but the dark thoughts filling his mind. Where was she going? Who was she with? The questions kept him awake at night, even as Becky slept soundly beside him. You need to get out more, Paul told him during a fake checkup that was really just a chance to talk. This act is consuming you. I'm close to the truth, Tom insisted. She's definitely hiding something. And what will you do when you find out? Have you thought that far ahead? Tom hadn't. Finding the truth had become everything. He hadn't considered what came after. The real turning point came 3 weeks into his blindness. Tom was home alone when he heard keys in the door. He quickly put on his dark glasses, grabbed his cane. But it wasn't Becky who walked in. Hello, called an unfamiliar male voice. Becky, you here yet? Tom froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Hello? Anyone home? The man's voice echoed through the house again. Tom gripped his white cane tighter, his mind racing. This was it, the moment of truth. He took a deep breath and called out, in the living room. Footsteps approached, and Tom kept his gaze unfocused, staring at nothing. A tall figure appeared in the doorway. Oh, the man said, surprise in his voice. You must be Tom. I'm Dave from Becky's office. She asked me to drop off some files for her to review tonight. Tom nodded, trying to appear relaxed while his heart hammered in his chest. Nice to meet you, Dave. Becky mentioned she's working on a big project. Yeah, we all are. Dave sounded uncomfortable. She said I could leave them on the kitchen counter. She'll be home soon. Feel free, Tom said, listening carefully to Dave's movements. The man walked to the kitchen, placed something down, then hurried back toward the door. Well, nice meeting you. Hope you, feel better soon, Dave said awkwardly. After the door closed, Tom waited 30 seconds before moving. He went to the kitchen and touched the files Dave had left. Opening them carefully, he took pictures with his phone. They were actual work documents, budget reports, and marketing plans. Was this Dave telling the truth? Was Tom wrong about everything? That evening, Becky came home carrying takeout. Sorry I'm late. Have you eaten? No, Tom said. Someone from your office stopped by. Dave? Becky paused for just a moment. Oh, right. I asked him to drop off some files I need to review. Nice of him, Tom said, noting how quickly she'd composed herself. They ate dinner together, and Becky chatted about office politics. Everything seemed normal, but Tom couldn't shake his suspicions. Why had Dave seemed so uncomfortable? Why hadn't Becky mentioned sending someone to their house? The next day, while Becky was at work, Tom checked the hidden camera footage. Nothing unusual. He scrolled through the photos he'd taken of the work files, looking for any clues. One page had a sticky note with a phone number. Tom called it. "Hello, Riverdale Restaurant," a voice answered. Tom hung up without speaking. Why would a restaurant number be on work files? That weekend, Becky said she needed to go into the office for a few hours. "Big deadline Monday," she explained. "No problem," Tom said. "I'll be fine here." After she left, Tom called Paul. "I need a favor. Can you drive me somewhere?" "Where to?" Paul asked. "Riverdale Restaurant." Paul picked him up 30 minutes later. "Aren't you sure about this? Following her could backfire badly." "I just need to know," Tom said. They parked across from the restaurant. "Can you see inside?" Tom asked, keeping up his blindness act in case anyone was watching. Paul looked through binoculars. "It's packed for lunch." "Wait, I see her. She's at a corner table." "Is she alone?" Tom held his breath. Paul was quiet for a moment. "No, she's with a man. Tall, dark hair." "Dave from the office?" Tom asked. "I don't know what Dave looks like," Paul reminded him. "But whoever it is, they're holding hands across the table." Tom felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What else are they doing?" "Just talking now." "Wait," he just reached over and brushed her hair back. "That's pretty intimate." Tom closed his eyes behind his dark glasses. "I've seen enough." Over the next week, Tom gathered more evidence. He recorded Becky's late-night phone conversations when she thought he was asleep. He noticed how she always showered immediately after coming home late. The hidden camera caught her looking up hotels on her laptop. Then came the final proof. While Becky was in the shower, her phone buzzed with a text. Tom had learned her new password by listening to her fingers tap the screen. The message was from Dave Work. "Can't wait for tomorrow. Hotel room booked. Tell husband another late meeting." Tom took a screenshot and sent it to his own phone. That night, he lay awake beside his sleeping wife, planning his next move. He had all the evidence he needed now. The question was, how would he confront her? The answer came the next morning when Becky mentioned her late meeting for that evening. "Actually," Tom said, "I was thinking of going to my parents' place for the night. Give you some space to focus on work." "That's a great idea," Becky said, a little too quickly. "I'll drop you off on my way to the office." Tom smiled, pretending not to notice her relief. Perfect. But he had no intention of staying at his parents' house. Tonight, he would see exactly what his wife was up to, and she would never expect it. Becky dropped Tom off at his parents' house that evening, kissing him quickly on the cheek. "Call me if you need anything. I'll pick you up tomorrow afternoon." "Don't work too hard," Tom said, tapping his white cane on the sidewalk. He waited until her car disappeared around the corner before pulling out his phone. His mom opened the door. "Tom." What a surprise. "Hey, Mom," he said, still acting blind. "Can Paul pick me up here in about an hour? There's something I need to do." His mom looked confused but didn't ask questions. She had always been good that way. Inside, Tom explained just enough to his parents. "Becky and I are having some problems. I need to check something tonight." "Is that why you're pretending to be blind?" his dad asked bluntly. Tom nearly dropped his cane. "How did you know?" His dad laughed. "Son, I've known you since you were born. You looked directly at the bird feeder when you came in. Your eyes followed it when the cardinal landed." Tom sighed. "It's a long story. I promise I'll explain everything later." When Paul arrived, Tom's plan was set. They drove to the Grand Hotel downtown, where Tom had tracked Becky's phone location. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Paul asked as they parked across the street. "Whatever you see in there, you can't unsee it." Tom removed his dark glasses, blinking in the fading daylight. "I need to face this. I've been living in darkness too long, both fake and real." They entered the hotel lobby. Tom had left his white cane in the car. At the front desk, he smiled confidently. "I believe my wife checked in earlier. Becky Miller?" The clerk typed on her computer. "Yes, Mrs. Miller is in room 412. Would you like me to call up?" "No thanks. I'll surprise her. Tom's voice was steady despite the storm inside him. In the elevator, Paul tried one last time. We can still leave. Get a divorce lawyer instead. Tom shook his head. I need to see for myself. They reached the 4th floor. Tom walked slowly down the hallway, his legs feeling heavier with each step. Outside room 412, he paused, listening. He could hear faint laughter inside, Becky's laugh, the one that had once made him fall in love with her. Paul squeezed his shoulder. I'll wait by the elevator. Tom took a deep breath and knocked. The laughter stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and there stood Dave, his shirt half unbuttoned. His smile vanished when he saw Tom. You, but aren't you blind? Behind him, Becky's voice called out, Who is it, honey? Tom pushed past Dave into the room. Becky sat on the bed in a silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand. Her face went pale. Tom? What are you? How can you? She scrambled to her feet, clutching the robe tighter. See? Tom finished for her. Surprise. I'm not blind. Never was. Dave backed toward the door. I should go. Stay, Tom said coldly. You're part of this story too. Becky's shock turned to anger. You've been lying to me? Pretending to be blind? For how long? Almost a month, Tom said. About the same time you've been lying to me about Dave here. This is insane, Becky said. You pretended to have a disability? Who does that? Someone desperate for the truth, Tom replied. And now I have it. Dave edged toward the door again. Look, I didn't know things were serious between you two. She told me you were separated. Tom laughed bitterly. Separated? We sleep in the same bed every night. Becky's face hardened. Well, we might as well be separated. You've been distant for years, Tom. Always working, never really seeing me. So you found someone who did? Tom asked. Yes, she said defiantly. Dave makes me feel wanted. The room fell silent. Tom looked at the hotel champagne, the scattered clothes, the rumpled sheets. 7 years of marriage reduced to this tawdry scene. You know what's funny? Tom said finally. I started this whole blind act because I thought you were cheating, but I was hoping to be wrong. I wanted you to prove me wrong. Tears filled Becky's eyes, and I was hoping you'd fight for me when you noticed something was wrong, but you played detective instead. Tom realized they'd both failed each other, just in different ways. The weight of that truth was heavier than any anger he felt. I'll have my stuff out of the house by the end of the week, he said quietly, turning to leave. Behind him, Becky called out, What happens now? Tom paused at the door. Now we both stop pretending. Tom walked out of the hotel room without looking back. Paul was waiting by the elevator, concern written across his face. It's over, Tom said simply. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. Are you okay? Paul asked as they descended. Tom stared at his reflection in the mirrored wall. No, but I will be. That night, Tom stayed at Paul's apartment, sleeping on the couch that felt too short for his tall frame. He tossed and turned, his mind replaying the moment he'd opened that hotel room door. The look on Becky's face. The cheap champagne. The excuses. Morning came with a pounding headache and 6 missed calls from Becky. Tom didn't return them. Instead, he called in sick to work and drove to their house while he knew Becky would be at the office. The home they'd shared for 5 years felt different now, like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Tom packed his clothes into suitcases, grabbed his important documents and the photo album from his side of the family. He left his wedding ring on the dresser. As he was loading the car, his phone rang again. Becky. This time he answered. Are you at the house? She asked immediately. Just getting some of my things, Tom replied. We need to talk about this, Becky said, her voice softer than it had been at the hotel. What you did, pretending to be blind, that's not normal, Tom. And cheating is. Tom shot back. Silence hung between them. Finally, Becky spoke. I'm coming home. Wait for me. Please. Against his better judgment, Tom agreed. He sat in the kitchen, looking at the collection of refrigerator magnets they'd gathered from various trips. Disney World, the Grand Canyon, New York City, each one a memory of happier times. When Becky arrived 30 minutes later, her eyes were red from crying. She'd changed out of yesterday's clothes, but hadn't bothered with makeup. "You look different," she said, staring at Tom, without the dark glasses. "This is what I always looked like," Tom replied, "before the lies." They sat across from each other, the kitchen table and no man's land between them. "How did you do it?" Becky asked. "The blindness thing. It seems so real. The doctors, the tests." Paul helped, Tom admitted. He played doctor. The rest was just acting. "For a whole month?" Becky shook her head in disbelief. "That's dedication." "I wanted the truth," Tom said. "Well, now you have it." Becky looked down at her hands. "But what about my truth?" "Did you ever think about that?" "What truth?" "That I've been unhappy for years," she said. "That I tried to tell you so many times, but you were always too busy with work. That I needed something you stopped giving me long ago." "So you found it with Dave?" The name tasted bitter in Tom's mouth. "I found someone who paid attention," Becky said. "Who asked how my day was and actually listened to the answer." Tom wanted to argue, to defend himself, but deep down, he knew she wasn't entirely wrong. He had grown comfortable in their marriage, taking it for granted that they would always be okay. "When did we stop really seeing each other?" he asked quietly. Becky's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. Somewhere between the promotion and the house renovations and the holidays with your family, but never mind." They sat in silence, the clock on the wall ticking loudly. "So what happens now?" Tom finally asked, echoing Becky's question from the hotel. "I think you know," Becky said gently. "We can't come back from this. Too many lies. Too much hurt." Tom nodded slowly. "I'll call a lawyer tomorrow." "I'd already talked to one this morning," Becky admitted. "He says we can keep it simple, split everything down the middle." The businesslike way she discussed ending their marriage made Tom realize she had mentally checked out long ago, maybe even before Dave. As he stood to leave, Becky called his name. "Tom, for what it's worth, I am sorry, not just for Dave, but for letting us drift so far apart that you felt you needed to fake blindness to see the truth." Tom paused at the door, looking back at the woman he'd once vowed to love forever. "I'm sorry, too, for not seeing what was right in front of me until it was too late." Outside, the sun was shining brightly, almost mockingly cheerful against the darkness he felt inside. Tom slipped on his sunglasses, regular ones this time, and drove away from the house and the life he'd known. Some kinds of blindness, he realized, couldn't be faked or cured. 3 months had passed since that day at the hotel. Autumn had turned to winter, and a light snow fell as Tom carried a box of books into his new apartment. It was smaller than the house he'd shared with Becky, but it was his, a fresh start. The divorce papers had been signed last week, quick and clean, just as Becky had promised. They'd split everything down the middle, neither wanting to drag things out. Tom hadn't seen Dave since the hotel room, and he didn't ask Becky if they were still together. Some things were better left unknown. "That's the last one," Paul said, bringing in a final box labeled kitchen. "Thanks for helping," Tom said, handing his friend a beer from the fridge. "I couldn't have gotten through these past few months without you." Paul shrugged. "That's what friends are for. Though I still think pretending to be blind was the craziest thing you've ever done." Tom smiled faintly. "Not my proudest moment." After Paul left, Tom unpacked slowly, finding places for his belongings in this new space. He pulled out a framed photo he'd taken on his honeymoon with Becky. They looked so happy, so full of hope for their future. He considered throwing it away, but instead placed it in a drawer. Some memories were worth keeping, even the bittersweet ones. His phone buzzed with a text from his mom. "Dinner tomorrow?" "Dad's making his famous pot roast." Tom smiled and replied yes. His parents had been his rock during the divorce, never judging, just supporting. His mom had only asked once why he'd faked being blind. "I needed to see the truth," he told her. "There are easier ways to get the truth, honey," she'd replied gently. She was right, of course. The deception had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The next morning, Tom ran into his neighbor Jenny while collecting his mail. She was walking her golden retriever, a friendly dog named Buddy who immediately sniffed Tom's shoes. "Sorry about that," Jenny said, pulling gently on the leash. "He's too friendly for his own good." "No problem," Tom said, reaching down to pet the dog. "I like dogs." They chatted about the building's temperamental heating system, and Tom found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks. It was a small interaction, but it felt normal, something his life had been missing. Later that day, Tom visited Dr. Harris, the therapist he'd started seeing after the divorce. He'd been reluctant at first, but Paul had insisted. "How are we doing this week, Tom?" Dr. Harris asked, notepad ready. Tom thought for a moment. "Better, I think. I'm starting to feel like myself again." "And how would you describe yourself?" the therapist asked. It was a good question. Who was he now, after everything that had happened? "I'm still figuring that out," Tom admitted. "But I know I don't want to be the person who pretended to be blind to catch his wife cheating. I want to be better than that." Dr. Harris nodded. "What have you learned from this experience?" Tom had thought about this a lot. That deception, even when you think it's justified, changes you. I became so focused on uncovering Becky's lies that I lost sight of my own truth. Which is? That relationships need honesty to survive, not just about the big things, but the small things too. The everyday things that build up over time. As Tom drove to his parents' house that evening, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. His marriage was over. His home was different. Even his understanding of himself had shifted. At a red light, he noticed a couple arguing in the car next to his. The woman was gesturing angrily while the man stared straight ahead, clearly not listening. Tom felt a pang of recognition. When the light turned green, Tom drove on, leaving the arguing couple behind. He thought about what he might say if he could talk to his younger self, the man who had decided that pretending to be blind was the answer to his problems. "Open your eyes," he would say. "Really see the person you love before it's too late." As he pulled into his parents' driveway, Tom took a deep breath. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over yet. But for the first time since everything fell apart, he could see a path forward, one step at a time, with eyes wide open to whatever came next. Sometimes the hardest truths to face were your own, but facing them was the only way to truly begin again.